Welcome back. News Until 1380 WAOK, the voice of the people on 447-266-1380. Get involved in the conversation. People passionate politics on this Sunday afternoon. Still here for our conservative friend Woodrow Johnston, talking about some of the issues within the GOP. And now, Woodrow, one of the questions I have is, growing up, growing up in the 80s, I grew up with kind of the Reagan Republicans, kind of the rock-ribbed, anti-communist, Star Wars program, massive military spending Republican Party. What has happened where Republicans have seemingly become more of the dovish party, the more anti-war party? I couldn't imagine Reagan saying, well, we're not going to fund somebody and we're just going to let Russia win. That's just not something that would have happened in the 1980s. What do you think has been the sea change that happened seemingly since the Bush administration that has made Republicans less militaristic?
Well, I think that's just where the voters are at. I mean, frankly, in the past 2 decades, we've seen the candidate who actually campaigned as the anti-war president win. I mean, if you recall, George W. Bush actually campaigned as a non-interventionist. And then when he got into office, he said this in his memoirs, he said, I changed my mind. And then you had Barack Obama, who campaigned on the same thing. And, and I think you have this consistent trend where, actually the anti-war candidate tends to win, at least if they campaign that way. And then when they get there, they don't really make good on that promise. And, with respect that, President Trump is the only one who's come close to that.
Well, yeah, it depends on what you count as a war. President Trump did send airstrikes against Syria. He takes credit for "quote unquote" wiping out ISIS in the Middle East. We did have the American soldiers that died in Niger. He had the disastrous Doha agreement that led to the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So it's not that he was anti-war; it's just he kind of changes the definition as those things go. But taking your premise as it would be, do you think that Republicans are prepared to kind of unite with people on the far left and forming an anti-war coalition? Because the same way that people on the right don't want to fund the Ukrainian war, Bernie Sanders and AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar agree with all of that. Is there a possibility of forming an anti-war coalition between the Progressive Caucus and the MAGA Caucus?
I believe if there isn't, there should be. I mean, we used to be a country where if we agreed on one thing, we can team up on one thing because at the end of the day, we're all Americans. Unfortunately, as we've seen, things have gotten so polarized that, even me being a guest on your show is like a rare thing. So, it's part of a kind of a cultural issue where we've been told as kids to not talk about politics, money, or religion. And now we have a situation where you have a generation of Americans who don't know how to handle money, are afraid of handling a point of view that's different than theirs, and it's frankly really sad.
It's funny you say that because it's all relativistic. I've noticed the same people who have been complaining about cancel culture for the last 5 years. All of a sudden now they're completely fine with people being canceled for being pro-Palestinian. You're having people's job offers being pulled. People are getting fired for making pro-Palestinian statements. That's fine all of a sudden for the cancel culture crowd. Do you think that there's an opportunity for a coalition speaker, a speaker of the House that isn't from either party or that isn't from even in Congress, to being able to come together and say, we're just going to put somebody there that can get 100 Democratic votes and 117 Republican votes, continue to have a moderate conservative agenda, but at least keep the government open and keep bills running? Do you think there's a possibility of that happening, or are we too polarized for that?
We might be too polarized for it, Robert, but I would say it's a non-zero chance, as you like to color it, a non-zero chance. And we'll see. I mean, frankly, if having Trump on the ballot would be interesting. It would be interesting to see if, how Republicans would vote on that. We've seen his endorsement doesn't necessarily translate to a win sometimes. He endorsed Jim Jordan, like you mentioned before, and it didn't. And Jim Jordan is not the speaker, and he's not going to be. So I don't know. It's hard to say. I would say probably at this point, my guess is we're going to see, a Speaker McHenry who's kind of, a well-liked member, and someone who's kind of in the middle and kind of a guy who will call balls and strikes.
Now on that, we haven't really touched on the presidential race, primarily because nobody has been talking about that in recent weeks. But are Republicans really going to go into 2024 with a nominee who is in court literally every week, where you have two of his attorneys pleading guilty to one to a felony and one to a misdemeanor already? He's in court on a fraud trial right now where he's already been found guilty of fraud. Now he's just in the damages phase. He has three or four other felony cases going. He's been found liable for sexual assault and rape on E. Eugene Carroll. Are Republicans really going to have that as their nominee in 2024, or is it just no one else in the party that can compete?
Well, let me just say this. I think it's clear to anyone observing that Trump is going to be the Republican nominee, and there's probably not much anyone else can do. The more he gets prosecuted, the stronger he gets. And that's just the way it is. And I think whether you believe so or not, I think that most Americans, or not at least most Republicans, and many Americans believe that President Trump is being unfairly prosecuted. I think that you would see this type of reaction if a leader in the Democratic Party was being prosecuted this way. And, there's even historical precedents for that. And I think that, you look at the presidential race, we got a debate coming up. It looks like Nikki Haley, it looks like Ron DeSantis and Ramaswamy are the only ones who qualified so far. You've seen Will Hurd, he dropped out, he endorsed Nikki Haley. And I guess I would see at this point as if the anti-Trump Republicans want to have any chance, it looks like their best chance right now is Nikki Haley. But Republicans are individualistic, as we've experienced the past couple of weeks, and they don't like falling in line like Democrats do. No offense. And so I don't know if we're ever going to see any real serious anti-Trump candidate. The candidate that seem to be doing the best are, pretty much aligned with Trump on most of his policies.
Now with that, I know they say that it's a witch hunt, it's an unjust prosecution, but literally two of his attorneys pled guilty. These are experienced, Sidney Powell, Ken Cheeseborough. More than likely, we're going to see some of his other attorneys start pleading guilty soon also. What does it say? How is it a unjust prosecution when the actual lawyers are pleading guilty already?
Well, like I said, I can't get into, the legal strategy because I'm not an attorney, but I think, as well as I do, that there definitely are people who are unjustly prosecuted. There are people who even have to plead guilty because they're faced with, they're looking down a proverbial barrel of a gun. And, sometimes people make those choices to plead guilty, even if they know they're not. But it doesn't matter what that is. It just matters ultimately what the perception of the American people are. And they believe that this president's being unfair, or this former president's being unfairly prosecuted.
The way I could describe it is, if you're on an airplane and the pilot says the plane's going down, and then you say, nah, that's a hoax, this is all fake news. Then you look and the pilot and the co-pilot are jumping out the side door with a parachute on. That's generally a good sign that the plane is really going down. And I don't understand what will take for you Republicans to see this is not fake, this is not a witch hunt, this is not a scam prosecution. Plane's going down, Trump's going to jail. And if you make him the nominee, he'll be in jail for the election next year. All right, before we go, Woodrow, how can people get in contact with you? How can they follow you on social media?
Absolutely. On X, formerly known as Twitter, I am Liberty Woody. You can Google Woodrow Johnston on Woodrow Johnston on any social media platform.
Liberty Woody. That is hilarious. Thanks so much, Woodrow. Appreciate it. We'll be back after the break. Call in 44726-1380, News and Talk 1380 WAOK.